This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 275.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. And I have another great guest, which is no surprise at this point, I hope. I really hope it's not a surprise. Now I'm second guessing myself. So, my guest, his name is Jonathan Davis. And as usual, we talk about his story of how he became a sales engineer. And he has kind of an unorthodox start where he started in something completely unrelated and how he worked his way through to become a sales engineer. And we did discuss the idea of where is it? Apprenticeship journey, which is not something that happens often these days. But we did discuss that. We also discussed the mistakes that he's noticed sales engineers do and what to do about them. The beauty of this show is that I don't always agree with Jonathan, and Jonathan doesn't always agree with me. And we had the discussion, and I think we come closer to agreeing, not 100%, but at least understanding where each of us are coming from, and the fact that it's sales engineering has a art portion to it, and also a science, like technical portion to it. It's open to interpretation. So I won't be seeing you after the show because Jonathan does a great job of signing us off in Spanish. At least I hope he was signing us off. So let's jump into the show. Hey Jonathan, so we've been talking for 10 minutes. Let's pretend we haven't been. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Ramsey. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, it's nice to finally meet you. I don't think we actually communicated much other than like, hey, you want to be on the podcast? And that was the easiest yes I've had in my life, right? I appreciate that. Why did you say yes to begin with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I actually found your website, I guess, about a year or two ago, and I thought it was really interesting because there's not a lot of training material out there for SEs, and so I thought it was really neat that you're focused on that. That you're focused on, helping SEs get better, which is a career that a lot of people don't even know exists in the first place.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I've watched some of your episodes, enjoyed them, and so, yeah, I was more than happy to jump on.
Nice. By the way, like, why did you say yes is one of the first questions I ask any client when they just say yes to meeting us. So this is the first time I've actually used it on the podcast. I'm happy.
Interesting. Great way to get feedback.
Finally. So Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey?
Yeah.
Where you started and how you ended up where you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's see. I went to Texas A&M. When I was at Texas A&M, I actually majored in liberal arts. So I was doing like international relations, with concentration in Spanish language, studied abroad in Costa Rica, and things like that. But actually, part of the way through college, in like 2014, I started to get interested in web development. First, I took like just this random management information systems class, and they had like HTML, like learn HTML is like a small part of that class. And I enjoyed it. And and obviously it's not like a real programming language, but I enjoyed that very light intro to web development. And then after that, I had ideas, and like in 2014, a lot of people had ideas for startups, right? Applications. The Social Network movie had come out not that long ago, and so I had ideas. And so originally, I tried to persuade programmers to join me, right? And I was like, hey, I'll be the salesperson or whatever. You be the programmer. And I didn't have any money, and I found out that like persuading programmers to write code without if you don't have any money is very difficult to do. And so I was like, well, I should learn how to program myself so I can build my own ideas. And so that was really how I started learning how to program. But then my first job out of college was actually kind of like a third party recruiting job because I wanted to be close to tech, but I couldn't really get like a tech job. And so we were like headhunters. We placed engineers.
Okay.
But then I did that for about a year. Then I actually got a web development slash software job. Did that for a few years. And then, I actually got an opportunity to be an SE. And my first SE job, they're actually looking for somebody who had Spanish language skills, technical knowledge, and some sales experience. So it was a really good fit, with some of the different things I had done. And so that's how I kind of got on the path of being an FC in kind of like the beginning of 2020. And, that's the path I've been on since.
So many questions. All right. You said you took like an intro to HTML, part of another
Yeah.
course, and you
Yeah.
enjoyed it. What did you enjoy about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. It was just it was very logical and clear. I think maybe, you asked me that question, I'm reflecting on it. Maybe it's the fact that it's structured but creative at the same time, right? So you're creating, you can express yourself, but there are rules around it that you have to figure out. And so maybe it's that combination that I like.
That's pretty interesting. And you mentioned you studied like liberal arts. What was the actual degree?
I think it's officially called like international studies, but you pick a concentration. And so, like my minor, my concentration was like Spanish language in Latin America.
Okay. Oh yeah, these are very related things. Okay. So, okay. So you love the structure and the creativity. Oh man, you just described sales engineering. But then you got a job as a web developer. I mean, I think you skipped a few steps. How you became a headhunter. How were you studying web
Yeah,
development? Like, what was your process like?
yeah, that's a good question. So, really, just in my free time, working on coding projects here and there, did like a website or two, right, for relatives, things like that. And then, in order to get that job, I actually cold called, right, into different software companies because I had experience cold calling, in my job as a headhunter. Because really, my job was to get the managers because we kind of had two different kinds of people. We had the recruiters who would talk to the candidates, and then
Yeah.
we had people like myself who would cold call on the companies and find the managers, right, who had these needs. And so I had experience like cold calling, and I understood the power of like just getting somebody on the phone. And so I wasn't afraid to just like call people. And so like I basically just called people around Austin, which is where I'm based out of, and that's how I got my first job in software.
So to be clear, as a headhunter, your job was to find managers and cold call them so you can place someone at their company, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Find the manager, build a relationship with them, and then work with your recruiters to fill any needs that they have.
Okay. So instead of doing that, you placed yourself, basically.
Basically.
Okay. So you called this manager, you convinced them to meet with you. How did you convince them that you, with a couple of websites, you're good enough to actually become a web developer for their country? First off, what was the size of that company?
Yeah, it was really small at the time. I think they had like a half dozen people.
Okay. And how did you convince them that you're the right person, even if they didn't have a job? I don't, did they have a job opening?
They did, but it was for somebody more senior. And
Okay.
I didn't know about the job opening when I called them. And actually, I was told later that when I called, they were actually posting the job opening at that same time. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So how did you
um,
convince them?
yeah. Well, I think I was just really eager, right? And so, one, they saw that I was motivated, right? That I was willing to take the initiative. And then also, I offered to work for very cheap.
That's well, that's a way in.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
it's a small company. You're brand new to software within like a professional software development.
Yeah, it's
Like,
true. Yeah.
like, what are some of the challenges within the first year in order like that you face in order to learn how to do proper software and how to be a good part of the team?
Yeah. So actually, I think that it was really helpful. The first year or so, the fact that the owner of the company was a programmer himself, and so occasionally we were able to do pair programming, and so I was able to learn that way. And so if I get stuck on something, usually he could help me get unstuck. And then, of course, just independent learning. I think that anybody who gets into technology, you have to be willing to learn independently. And that's something I'd done before, like foreign languages, things like that. Fluent in Spanish. I speak a little bit of Russian as well. And so, really just being motivated to learn on your own time I think is a big part of being successful in any technical field.
So the way I'm seeing this, I agree 100% that once you get a job and you're an experienced person, you have to continuously learn on your own. But my thought process is, if you're someone brand new to a company, brand new to a domain, I mean, you did some web development on the side, but you weren't a developer, right? Like officially. Did you feel like you were drinking out of a fire hose in order to learn all this on your own? Like, just my thought process is you need some hand holding initially so you
Yeah,
can
I
take
mean,
off.
sure. Yeah, I mean, there were more senior programmers in the company, and also there was a good mix of projects because they built software for other people. And so, actually, the first thing that I did for them was I worked on Shopify websites.
Okay.
And Shopify, of course, you have a lot of things out of the box you can use,
Yeah.
but then you also have some custom scripting you can write, right?
Right.
And that was kind of my first thing was like Shopify, and then adding in custom CSS, custom
Okay.
HTML.
Okay, so they didn't leave you hanging, right? They kind of started you
Basically.
off. Okay, good. Well, like I would be very impressed if you were able to jump in as someone brand new with minimal handholding and just learn on your own and become this
No,
great developer.
yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be an apprenticeship journey,
Yeah,
and you're going to start off with smaller tasks and kind of ramp up.
but apprenticeship journey, I love that statement because like back in the day, everyone was an apprentice for something. Most like if you're talking about the like medieval times, everybody, all children
Yeah.
were apprenticed at their parents' work, and but now we don't have that, right? We go to university and we learn everything we're supposed to learn in university, and then we get a job and realize we don't know anything, and we have to learn everything all over again. So I love that. I'm just gonna take a note. Apprenticeship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would really encourage any young people in their 20s to really focus on trying to master what Cal Newport called rare and valuable skills.
Yeah.
I think in your 20s it's less important to make money, right? It's more important to learn skills, and then you can try to cash that in right later in your career.
I think they should start before their 20s. I think
Yeah,
they
no, I
should
agree.
start in high
Ideally.
school, like at 11 years old, go get a job, become an apprentice.
The
So, okay.
earlier the
Uh,
better.
what was that?
The earlier the better.
Yeah, I mean, like I was listening to a podcast where there's this private school and they get their kids to start apprenticing around 11 years old, and they have to find out like who they want to apprentice with. They need to email them. They need to get the job, um, and then they need to go do the job. And at 11 years old, they can figure out if this is something they're going to like in the future or not. I don't know how real that is. Like, you will know if you're going to like it in the future because people change and all that.
Yeah.
But at least from 11 years old, you can try 7 different apprenticeship before you're 18. And now when you go to university, if you choose to do that, at least you know, like, and you have an idea versus the way we had it, at least in Lebanon. I don't know how it is in the US. We had one person during our last year of high school to come in and talk to us about all the different jobs. And that person has never done any of the jobs. So she couldn't answer any of the questions. And then we still have to figure out what we're going to do in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, I think it's a really interesting approach. I think if you're apprenticing that early, it's probably going to be less about that job and then more about just like general things you can learn from it, right? Because the job you're doing, it might not even exist, right, in 15 years when you're ready. But you learned how to work with people,
Yeah.
right? You learned how to learn, you learned how to be a professional. So I think those are all good outcomes.
Well, here's the thing: it might not exist, but they might have, like, it might have like morphed into something else, and the kids can morph with it because they started early. Versus,
Sure.
you know, again, it's not a discussion about high school, but if anyone's interested, I think it's called Wonderkind School or something like that. Uh,
Interesting.
so if people want to check it out. So, all right, going back to you, Jonathan, um, you studied liberal arts, became a developer, and then after working as a developer for a few years, you said in 2020 you had the opportunity to become an SE. Right. One, what did you know about sales engineering before applying to the job?
Nothing.
Okay. So two, why did you even apply to the job?
So it was a really good mix of things that I had done before. So that they required Spanish speaking skills, and I was really big into foreign languages, especially then. But then it also required a technical background, which I had. Also required sales skills. Pay was good, and so everything just kind of lined up with that opportunity.
So I'm hearing everything that they would have required from you. I just, what did you require? Like, why did you even apply? Like beyond like, oh, I have the same skills because you probably have the same like good skills that fit many different roles, including software engineering. Why did you pick sales engineering and apply to that role?
Well, that job in particular, because I have a lot of different skills. Most of those skills are not going to fit in one job, right? So it's hard to because I really was super passionate about foreign languages. Like I can't underemphasize that. And so the fact that I had one job where I could do foreign languages, right, and be technical, and use sales skills, that was really a big part of the reason why it was appealing to me. Like if I'm a programmer, I'm exercising one set of skills, right? But I'm not doing anything with my language skills.
Well,
And so that
you can program in Spanish.
I'm sorry.
You can program in Spanish. I don't know if that's real. By the way, if you're interested in learning Arabic, and we can do like I can teach you Arabic, you can teach me Spanish, and you'll get the profanity down within the first week.
That's interesting. I looked into Arabic in the past. I read that it's a really hard language to learn. It's one of the hardest language for English speakers, and so I think that would be an interesting challenge to take on sometime.
I don't know if it's one of the hardest. I mean, at least it has only like 28 letters
Yeah,
versus
fair.
something like Chinese or Japanese where you have an encyclopedia of letters. I don't know if it's the hardest, but I know a lot of Canadians who like get married to Lebanese people and they know how to speak it. They might not know how to write it, but it's easier to speak, I think. But I am biased. Okay, we'll discuss that later. We can do the co-training thing later. Um, okay, so you went in, you became an SE. What was that first role? I mean, I know you had this view of what sales engineering is. It matches all your skills that you wanted to like work with. What was reality versus expectation?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed that first job. So I had a lot of colleagues who were overseas in Malta, and so I worked with them. Uh, and I did get to use Spanish language, so I had a lot of clients in Latin America. I got to do that. I found that I was good at the job. I was good at explaining technical concepts, explaining the value of our solution, and so I really enjoyed that. I was there for about a year and a half. Um, but I think that was one of that was probably one of the more rewarding roles that I've had, even though it was in the middle of a pandemic.
And it's also like I'm looking at it. It's in the security world. It's not like web development or anything. Was there, from a technical perspective, was there also a shift in learning, or were you able to apply?
Well, I think it's a pretty good correlation because like a lot of the things we're focusing on was application level security
Okay,
specifically, right? So vulnerabilities that are going to come up because of coding errors.
okay.
And yeah, so it was a pretty good match, and definitely having a web development background was helpful, right, to understanding some of the security concepts, some of the application testing security concepts.
And were your customers web developers or security engineers?
Mostly security engineers.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. Um, don't know why it's interesting. I just thought it was. You and since then you've moved a couple of different like SE roles. What is solution architect? Did you find a difference between the solution architect role and the SE role?
No,
No, it's just a
it's just
different
it's just
title.
SE by another name. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fancy title. I like it.
So, yeah. Well, I know like at some companies, the solution architect is like a specialist, whereas the SE is a generalist. But a lot of companies, like I guess, like that one did that. Um, so, what made you switch jobs from like SE to solution architect?
Well, yeah, there are a couple factors. One factor was compensation, and then the other factor was it did give me opportunity to learn more about application security testing. because in my first role, it was DAST focused. And so DAST is dynamic application security testing.
Okay.
And so it's really focused on testing like a web application after it's been deployed to production.
Okay.
And basically, a DAS scanner is kind of like an automated pen tester you can think about, although it's a very dumbed down version. Pen testers would get angry with the comparison.
Yeah.
Um, but at the other company that I went to, it wasn't just DAS, but also we did testing of SAS, which is static application security testing, and software composition analysis, which is like looking at the third party libraries.
Yeah.
And so it allowed me to get like more experience in other parts of the stack, not just testing the application at the end when it's finished, but also finding coding errors along the way. And you can find different types of coding errors. And so it let me kind of broaden my knowledge of it.
So you're very niched, and now it's a little bit wider.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. It's very interesting. And like, if you were to describe sales engineering to someone who doesn't know what it is, how would you describe it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, so I think, you can of course go through like the different, different aspects of the job, right? You could say that, it's your job to give demos and, to prove the technical value of the solution, to know the product really well, things like that. One analogy that I find kind of interesting for people who know golf. Have you played golf at all? Is it like a
I went once to the driving range and got kicked out.
okay, fair enough. So maybe it wouldn't be like the most helpful analogy then.
No,
But
but
I think
other people play golf. You can
yeah,
share it,
yeah.
and
I think for people who play golf a lot, a helpful analogy is a sales engineer is kind of like a caddy, right? And so like the golf caddy doesn't just carry the bags, right? That's of course what everyone knows them for, but they also provide strategic advice to the golfer, right? So it's the caddy's job to know like how far away you are from the pin, like where is all the trouble. But ultimately, the golfer is going to be responsible for executing the golf shot,
yeah,
and ultimately the golfer is going to get like the glory or the blame, right? If it goes badly or if it goes well. And so I
right,
think there's a lot of an analogy to that. You're kind of in sales engineering, you're kind of like a technical advisor.
right. Okay, there's a couple of things I'm going to push back on. Uh,
Sure.
I mean, I like the analogy. There's not one thing I want to clarify. Like as SEs, like caddies in theory, they're not performing anything, right? But as like SEs, we have to perform. We have to perform the demo. We have to ask the questions, and so we're very much more involved. Like who are we caddies to? By the way, are we caddies to the salespeople, or are we caddies more to the customers?
I would say the salespeople. It's not a perfect analogy, but yeah, for somebody who's familiar with golf and but not the SE role, want to understand what it's like. I would make that comparison.
Okay, I feel like a salesperson might very well often give the caddy the chance to actually like whack the ball. And if it was my
Fair.
case, like the way I think about it, if I were to give an analogy, it'll be like a quarterback and a running back, where the salesperson is the quarterback and the SE is the running back. And although there's no perfect analogy, you're right. Like this is where the in this analogy, the quarterback has to score the touchdown themselves, but at least every once in a while they pass it to the running back who moves the deal a little bit further down the road, and then the quarterback takes over again and does the same thing over and over.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
And you mentioned something: sales engineers have to show the technical value. My pushback there would be SEs have to show the business value with the technology. Right?
No, I agree 100%. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about and kind of like the mistakes SEs make is, just showing tech value and not tying it to the business pain.
Okay, so let's talk about that, since this is what we wanted to talk about. What made you want to talk about mistakes SEs make?
Well, I think that it's a good fit, with your podcast and your audience and just people who want to get better, right, at sales engineering,
Right.
to kind of be reflective about the job and think about, what goes well, what doesn't, and how you can improve. And so yeah, I picked this topic because I think it's it's a really good fit for people who are trying to level up. And
Okay.
I assume a lot of people are listening to the podcast to level up.
Yeah. So okay, let's do it this way, if you don't mind. We didn't talk about this beforehand. I mentioned it briefly. I mean, you had like a list of what, five, six, or whatever the number is.
Yeah, yeah.
We can talk about one, what's the mistake, but I'm very curious of like how you figured out that it's a mistake, like what prompted you to understand that it's a mistake and fix it, or if you never ran into it, that's fine. So what's the first one on your list?
Yeah. So actually, just what you brought up, and 100% in agreement, is this idea of just talking about the tech side and not tying that to business pain. And so I think that a lot of times as SEs, as engineers, we're technologists. We're very excited about technology. We're very excited about features. But the business person, first of all, they're usually a lot more focused on specific business outcomes. They might be less interested in the technical side. And there are also a lot of vendors that they've seen, right? And so even though to you, your features are the coolest thing ever, to them, you're kind of just another vendor, right? And so you want to be able to point out, because you might be the 12th vendor they've seen, right, that month, and so you really want to be able to tie in, how those features are mapping to their business pain. And I think some of the more effective demos I've done have been shorter and just laser focused on like what the customer wants to actually see, as opposed to here's all the cool stuff. Right?
So I like we haven't talked about this before, but yesterday I put in a post on LinkedIn, and the post was, "Answer me this: a technical solution without a business problem solves what?" And, and
Interesting.
we had a bunch of comments. And today I actually, like I said yesterday, like I'll share my thoughts about this tomorrow. And the big thing is, like what I wrote here, and it's 100% in agreement with yours. Like as sales engineers, and especially those who come from an engineering background, like you and me, we fall in love with the solution, but the solution to what might not be clear.
Right.
We might think like a feature is cool or sounds helpful, and when we talk to the customers about it, we talk about it from the perspective of being cool or helpful. But we should be falling in love with the problem. If we do that, then when we talk to the customers about something cool, we can tie it to their problem, which is usually a business problem.
Yeah, no, no, 100% in agreement. And I think even outside of sales engineering, right, people talk about sometimes companies being a solution in search of a problem, right? Like if you have a startup, you want to actually be solving a real problem and not
Yep.
just have something cool that you're trying to convince people they could use,
Yeah.
right?
Unless you're the iPhone, but
Yeah.
that's a different story. Okay, so how did you realize? How did you come to that realization? I mean,
Um,
did you do that mistake, or is it something you observed other people do it?
I've done it. I'm definitely guilty of it. And you can just tell, right, when people are not engaged. Like if you're giving your general overview demo, right, and
Yeah,
and the customer's not interacting. And so trial and error. Talking to other SCs about what works, what doesn't. Podcasts such as yours, to be honest, right?
thank
And
you.
you kind of, and that's how you kind of start to glean these insights.
Nice. All right, what's the next one on the list?
So the next one on the list is not respecting the competition, right? And so this goes back to kind of this idea about the customer is you're probably just one of the vendors that they're looking at. So I think a lot of times when you're in a company, it's easy to kind of drink the marketing Kool-Aid, right? About like everything about, you're the leader in your category and everything's amazing about your product and you're really excited about it. And I'm not saying that your product isn't amazing. I'm sure that it is, but to the customer, you're just another vendor. And in software, the barriers to entry are usually pretty low, right? It's not that hard to ship software. And so what that means is that there are a lot of other people in your category, most likely, right? And so, as a consequence of that, you might think that your product is super unique and that you have a lot of amazing features. But the customer sees you as just another vendor. And so I think it's really critical, especially if you're in like a competitive situation, to understand all the other vendors, understand where they're weak, understand where they're strong, and then of course you want to try to guide the pilot to your strengths away from your weaknesses. You want to plant doubts about the competitor's weaknesses, but you can't do any of that if you think that you're amazing and that nobody else is in the category that you're in.
I've lost deals to competitors because in the like, let's say, even if you're an incumbent company, it's in the customer's best interest to talk to the non-incumbent as well, to keep the incumbent in check, make sure they're honest.
Mhm.
So even if you're the incumbent and you think, oh, they're always going to buy from me, there's always this chance that they went this extra mile. And for example, I lost a deal. Um, we were talking to the customer. Both our company and the competitors didn't have a specific feature. I said, I talked to the product management and we're going to implement this for you and it'll be ready by X. The competitors jumped on a call with the product management and the customer. And that's the reason they won the deal.
Wow.
In my head, it's like, I don't want to bother the customer with like an extra meeting. I know exactly what they want. The product management team knows exactly what they want. We're going to implement it for you. But sometimes just showing that extra effort is what wins the deal. I didn't respect the competition because, you know, and
Yeah,
it's like it hurts. Right?
yeah, no, it's 100% true. I think that sometimes in a competitive pilot, it's not necessarily the best product that wins, right? Sometimes it's the best salespeople, just as you pointed out, the salespeople who have the most hustle, because there's a limited amount of time, right, to frame kind of your solution. And it's not like the customer is systematically testing, right, every aspect of your product and their product to really understand which one is better. And so the ability of the sales team to
Yep.
kind of shape that conversation, I think can be just as important, sometimes more important than, the product itself.
And yeah, like just show the customer. You know, you drive, right?
Yeah,
When you did the test, they tell you you have to show extra effort and you're looking into your mirrors, you're looking behind, you're looking into your blind spot. But in real life, when you're driving, you don't drive like that.
right,
Sometimes you have to show the customer that you're looking,
right.
even though you
Yeah,
know, like, I promised you this thing. Like, it's just that was my conversation afterwards. Like, I promised you we're gonna get this done. I didn't want to waste your
right,
time with extra meetings.
right.
It's like, yeah, well, I had more faith in them because they actually like jumped on a call. It's like, all right, fine, but we just,
Yeah, no,
you
yeah. At
know,
the end of the day, we're selling to humans, right? So it's not always going to be rational.
and you should appreciate this. I tell everybody it's so much harder to debug humans than it is to debug machines and code.
It's true. Well, because when you debug a machine, there's a solution,
There's
right?
logic, right? There's
Yeah,
there's logic behind it, but the
yeah.
humans a lot of times there just is not logic, or my logic is different than their logic. Right?
I
Because
agree.
in my mind, I'm doing them a favor. I'm not wasting your time on a call. In their mind, Ramsey doesn't care enough about me to set up a call.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. Interesting.
So it's like, oh, man, it just sucks being an introvert. Uh, yeah, different topic. All right, what's the third on your list?
So actually, it ties right into what we just talked about. So not developing soft skills,
Mm,
right? And I'm not trying to, pick on you because I'm 100% guilty of the same thing, right? I like chess. I like logic. I like things that are rational. And so I think, yeah, sometimes as engineers, we forget, right, that we're selling to people and that relationships matter. And again, that goes back to competitive pilot, right? Okay, you're in a competitive pilot. The customer sees you as just another vendor. They don't
yeah.
see you as special as you see yourself. And so another thing you can do to help differentiate yourself is be a human, right? Connect with the customer, have a relationship with them outside of work. It makes a difference.
I mean, I, you're familiar with the Challenger sale?
I am familiar with it. Yeah.
I hate it, just so you know. But because they talk about like relationship selling is not as good as like the Challenger selling.
Yeah,
In my mind, you can't challenge if you don't have a good relationship.
I agree. That's a good
Like
point.
if you're meeting, like you're, let's say you, like I'm married. Before, if I challenged my wife day one before I even got to know her and how she might not be my wife today. Right? And
Right.
I'm not talking about like I did challengers. Like we got into an argument that Diet 7 Up doesn't have caffeine versus caffeine. I won that conversation. I haven't won any others since. But that wasn't like that was a junior thing. But if there's something serious, like they're thinking, oh, I should use an in-house tool versus your tool, because that's the number one competitor for most
Yeah.
customers, just an in-house tool. And you're looking at them as like, you're nuts. How are you going
Right.
to challenge them if you don't have a good enough relationship with them?
No, yeah, I agree. I agree 100% with that. And I think that you probably, if you are going to challenge them, you don't want to be argumentative about it, right? And this also goes back to the soft skills. Like, how do you persuade somebody? Because if you're debating someone or arguing with someone, then they're trying to beat you, right? And you're
Yeah.
trying to beat them. Versus, let's collaborate and find the best solution together. I think it's a different conversation, a different style.
Yeah, I mean, when people start trying to justify instead of trying to learn,
Yeah,
you already lost that, like, that deal,
100%.
because everybody's defensive at this point. No one's trying to
Yeah.
understand. All right. How did you figure this out? Did you run into a problem?
Yeah, I think just working with people and seeing what doesn't work, and that it's very hard to like just persuade a customer, right? If they have kind of something they're stubborn about a feature or something that they need, and you think that they don't need it or that they should be flexible in the requirement, just coming directly at them, right, and trying to explain to them why they don't need it usually doesn't work.
Yeah.
You kind of need to be a little bit softer, a little bit more persuasive, and this goes to the soft skills,
Yeah.
and I think this is kind of a higher level skill for SEs to develop, right? I think that first you want to get the basics, right? You want to know your product, be a good presenter, et cetera, et cetera. But then you start thinking about, okay, how can I continue to prove as an SE? I think doing, I think some companies call it force management.
Yeah.
Like these softer persuasive skills is a
Yeah.
good way to level up.
I'm not familiar with that, but what's coming to mind is either Stephen Covey or Dale Carnegie. In one of
Mhm.
their books, they said, uh, in order to be understood, seek to understand, or seek to understand in order to be understood. Right? How are you gonna guide someone if you don't understand why they're thinking? So if customer A says, I want to do this, and you think they should do something else, but you don't know why they want to do that to begin with, how are you going to tell them, no, you shouldn't do this?
Yeah, great point.
First, seek to understand what is it that they're trying to accomplish with this before telling them, like, there might be a better way. Like, I
Yeah,
understand what you're doing. How about we think about it this way instead? So,
absolutely, great point.
all right. Anything else on the list?
So another thing I think you can help you level up that a lot of SEs don't do, and a lot of professionals don't do in general, is we don't train like athletes, right?
I guess people are not watching on YouTube. I got so excited right now because that's something I've been preaching.
Yeah.
Sales engineers are the athletes of the business world. Please keep going, keep going. Don't let me interrupt. I already did.
No, no, it sounds like we're on the exact same page here. So I think that a lot of times in business we neglect this concept that actually became popular like 10, 15 years ago, called deliberate practice. And I think Malcolm Gladwell, really made it popular in his book Outliers, but it was kind of based on some research before that. This idea that you need 10,000 hours, right, to become great at something. But what a lot of people overlook about that is it's not just 10,000 hours of time, right? Like it's not just, okay, I'm on a job 40 hours a week. And so, if you multiply that out, that's like 5 years. I have my 10,000 hours. It's actually 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, right? And so it's deliberate practice is a very specific kind of practice. It's where you're really stretching your abilities to kind of just beyond the limit of what's comfortable for you currently. You're measuring what's happening, and you have a specific goal towards your improvement. And so athletes engage in this all the time. Chess players engage in deliberate practice, musicians, but it's not something that professionals really do. And so I think like finding ways to incorporate deliberate practice into like a white collar job, even if it's just a little bit, is going to be a big differentiator.
So, 100% agree. The one I want to add one thing. It's like, yeah, 10,000 hours to become great at something, but it's like 20 hours to be somewhat proficient.
Yeah.
Right? And the difference between proficient and great is so huge that people think that as soon as they're proficient, they're great. but they're missing so much. And I love that you said that about, like, I mentioned to you that I coach sales engineers. And that's the main reason I like to coach sales engineers and not do like boot camps or whatever, because
Yeah,
athletes have had coaches their entire lives. They've had
right.
fitness trainers, they've had nutrition coaches, they've had coaches, basketball coaches, soccer coaches, football coaches, whatever. And that's the main reason why I do that, because sales engineers are the athletes of the sales world. And it's not that we don't do deliberate practice. Most SEs don't practice. They practice live in front of the customers, which is like
Right.
an athlete practicing during a game.
Right. No, yeah, no, 100% agree. Yeah. And so I think that there's a lot of extra performance benefits you can get, out of doing it. And I agree with you that there's a big gap between being good and great, right? Like sometimes it'll take you just as long to go from zero to good as it will to go from good to great, right?
Yeah.
Like think about how long it would take you in golf if you wanted to go from, just being a complete beginner to breaking 80, which would be considered like a very good amateur, right? It might take you many years, but then how long is it going to take you to go from being a very good amateur to Tiger Woods? You might never get there, right?
Well,
So,
I can tell you this: I will never get to being a good amateur if I keep
yeah.
getting kicked out of driving ranges. But yeah, no, yeah, 100%.
Fair.
Um, okay. Do you have anything else on your list?
I do. So yeah, I don't know if we want to go through everything. So let me pick something good here. I think, yeah, let me combine a couple of these. So not building a relationship with a product team,
Yeah.
which also relates to like an opportunity to deepen your expertise. And so let me kind of talk about both of those in
Yeah.
just like one point. So, a lot of times with the product, the product is a living, breathing thing, right? And the documentation can be stale, and a lot of times it doesn't contain all the nuance. And so if you're just relying on the documentation, you're really missing out on understanding the product at a much deeper level. But if you can build a relationship with the PMs, right? If you can build a relationship with an engineer or an engineering manager, the depth of understanding of the product that you get from that, it's just such a beneficial thing to do. I think a lot of SEs miss out by not talking directly to the people who are involved in making the product right.
So documentations will always tell you how, will never tell you why,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is, I guess, the difference between the technical and the business.
Yeah.
And for me, I find product managers are like have a wealth of stories, and it's the same with engineers, of why they did something some way versus another, or why they added a feature over another. Because by the time it comes to us, a feature is a feature,
Right.
but the PM added it for some reason. The PM would never add a feature that's not going to make them money. They're going to get
Right.
fired for that. So if you can talk to the PM and figure out, or the engineer, figure out, like, why did we add this feature? Which customer requested it? Why did they request it? What problems were they having? Now you can go have conversations with your own customers. Like,
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And like if you build these relationships, sometimes you can also get the ability to help shape the direction of features, right? Because we're on the field, right? We talk to customers,
yeah,
and sometimes the product team is insulated, right, from the from the customer pain. And so like having that relationship, right, where you're able to talk to them about what customers need or what isn't working for customers in the field,
yeah,
I think is helpful. And this goes back to the point that you made earlier, right? Actually, about talking to customers and the challenger sale, right? Is how can you challenge somebody before you have a relationship, right?
yeah.
How if you have a relationship with product, you're going to have a lot more influence in terms of guiding the direction of the product, right? Than if you just try to come in with no human relationship and tell them what they should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a sales process internally at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jonathan, like, I was thinking, I mean, I know you have a lot more or a few more on the list. We could either come back and do another session and discuss the rest of them, or you could just go through whatever you wanted to go through right now. It's up to you.
I'll just share one more thing.
Okay.
I would say that The last thing I would point out that SEs don't do that they can do to really help level up is just deepening expertise. So I think that there's a like you can be kind of a generalist SE, right? Like let's say that you work at a company and they have 5 or 6 products. You can be the generalist person, right, who knows a little about all the products, and then you just bring in the specialist, right, whenever the customer wants to go deeper on one of them. But I think that that approach makes you more easy to replace because it's not hard, for the company to hire somebody else, and it doesn't take that long for that person to get up to kind of like a good generalist knowledge. But if in addition to being a generalist, if you really deepen your expertise in 1 or 2 areas, then I think you're really differentiating yourself. You're really adding value, and plus you're making yourself harder to replace if you're one of the go-to people in a given area.
That's an area for debate. I agree and disagree at the same time.
Sure.
I mean, I think journalist SEs, the thing they should have deep knowledge of is their customers. If an SE can have a deep knowledge of their customer and their customer base, they're hard to replace. But if an SE doesn't have any deep knowledge in any direction, whether it's technical or customer, then yeah, they can be replaced and they didn't add value or remove value. But sometimes it's hard. Like I'm a journalist SE. I have, you mentioned five products. I have around 50. And each product has 100 or 1,000 permutations. Right. And so when you go to companies like larger companies that have a big portfolio, it's very difficult to be a specialist. It's even difficult to be a generalist, which is why knowing your customer and also using just-in-time learning, right, to get something done is useful. But like the one domain I think people should focus on personally, and I don't know if you agree after this conversation or not, is knowing their customers. Because if you know your customer, you can tell them you know which product they're going to need, which solution they're going to need, what's going to come down the pipe, who's going to say no, who's going to say yes, right? And now you can, through those relationships, you can actually bypass. Like, all right, now I have one customer who's blocking everything that I'm doing. I am doing everything I can to just build relationships around them so that they're forced to talk to me. You know, doesn't matter how much I know the product. If I don't have
Yeah.
those relationships, it's not very useful. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I agree, and yeah, that definitely goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier. I think the soft skills are definitely important. I'm not saying that product knowledge is a replacement for soft skills. As long as you're selling to humans, you're going to need soft skills. You're going to need relationships. So completely agree with that point. Um, I guess you could say there are probably different paths, right, to differentiate yourself, different paths to add value. I think deepening expertise is certainly one path you can take.
Well, so what I would say about that is the deeper you have expertise in multiple areas, the easier your job is. Right? You have to have expertise in your customers. You have to have expertise in something. Otherwise, you're easily replaceable.
Right.
So I guess we agree on that.
I think so. I think we agree for the most part.
Okay. All right. For the most part. Ooh, tell me what's the part that we don't agree on?
I think that we might, and I respect the difference, but I think that we might have a slightly different weight, right, towards, the value of going deep in a certain area, versus being more generalist, right? Like how important do we think that is? Um, it could be different based on organization as well. Like you mentioned, 50 products, and I don't know about kind of like the structure of your organization. What's valued there. So some of this is probably organizational dependent. Um, but yeah, I think probably the biggest difference would be just the value we put on being the go-to person, right, in 1 or 2 areas.
Right. I am the go-to person for my customers. Right. So that's how I see it. I agree. You have to, in order to be, there's a book called The Four Disciplines of Execution. And they kind of say if you want to keep your job, just do your job. If you want to be great at it, if you want to get promotion or whatever, become an expert in something,
Hmm.
or focus on one thing. Something to that effect. So you could be an okay SE, right? Proficient, a good SE,
Hmm.
if you know a little bit of everything.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you want to be a great SE, you're gonna have to be having expertise in something.
I agree.
And that's something we might disagree on. Like I put more weight on knowing the customer. Uh, you put more weight on having deep knowledge in one aspect of your technology. Sounds fair?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah. All right. That's fair, and everybody can make their own decisions. Yeah, you mentioned that there's more than one path, right? Either way, figure out what paths work for you. All right, Jonathan, it's time to move on to the not so fire round, but we're almost out of time. I don't know if you have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do this, but let's do this in a fire round succession versus not so fire round. And I think you already answered the first one, but what is it that you love about sales engineering?
Oh, so are these like rapid fire?
You know what? Do whatever you want. This is not so fire round.
Okay, okay,
So
gotcha. Yeah, let's see. What do I love about sales engineering? I like that it's kind of a blend between the technical side and the selling side. And so it allows you to use different skills. So it allows you to use communication, presentation, but also have deep technical knowledge, and all of those things come together to make you good at what you do.
okay. Second question is, what would you consider are your superpowers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think superpowers. Um, I think I'm strong in communication. I think being able to. I think I'm a decent teacher, so I think being able to take things that are hard and explain them simply.
The superpower that popped in my head, like based on our short conversation, is your ability to learn.
Oh,
Uh, I don't
yeah.
know you very well, so you might like, but that's what I thought about when we were
I,
talking through it.
I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Uh, Third question of the not so fire round: is there a book or resource you would recommend for sales engineers who maybe want to learn from their mistakes?
Yeah, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast, but I definitely would recommend your podcast, We the Sales Engineers. Like I said, that's why I agreed to come on it. That's why I connected with you on LinkedIn once I found out about your podcast. So I think that We the Sales Engineers is a good general resource. And then like as far as specific things, I think you definitely want to read about your domain because one of the ideas is that has been espoused in some books is that you want to be able to teach the customer, and you can't teach the customer if you don't have deep knowledge of their domain, and the customer is usually in domain expert, right? So like in application security, I'm usually talking to a security team, and so if I don't understand security, if I don't understand what they're doing every day, it's going to be a pretty shallow conversation. And so you definitely want to read books that deepen your domain knowledge.
Yeah,
And
and
so yeah, for somebody in my industry, that might be web application hackers handbook. Other industries, right? Your knowledge may vary.
yeah, I wish there was a network test handbook. There isn't one. Maybe I should create one. All right. So the last question of the not so far, and Jonathan, is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm definitely trying to get healthier. So, just finding the time right outside the job to exercise, right? Of course, you look better, you feel better, you're less stressed, and it lowers my blood pressure. So, win-win all around.
Well, I hope you succeed in that very, very soon. Last question
Thanks.
of
And
the day.
I see you've got the tool. We talked about it a little bit, but
Yeah,
I see you've got the
yeah.
tools to work on it as
It's
well.
you see my paperweight behind me, uh, my squat rack. So, last question of the day, Jonathan. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So if you search Jonathan Davis Snyk, then I'll come up. It's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Well, the easiest way to do it would be good to go to the show notes of this show, wetheSalesEngineers.com/show 275, I think. Yeah. And I'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in there.
Perfect.
Jonathan, the way I usually end the show is after we're done, I go and record an outro, but we've been going along, so I don't want to belabor the point. I usually tell people with that, I am signing off. How do you say that in Spanish?
I don't know how to say it, signing off exactly, but I could
Logging
say,
out?
yeah, well, I could say, for example, esto es todo, gracias por escuchar. That's everything. Thanks for listening.
There we go. We ended there.